Sometimes when we talk about true crime, we can get so caught up in the headlines and the twists and all the shocking details, but we're really reminded that behind every single one of those headlines, there's a human story. And today, we're diving into a case that really brings that truth home for us. We're talking about Heather Maples.
Yeah, Heather was a 22-year-old woman who had so much life ahead of her. She had dreams of becoming a psychologist, and she was so dedicated to her family, especially her brother Ryan, who had developmental challenges. And in fact, she had just moved to Murfreesboro to be closer to her friend Chaz and to pursue her dreams. So it's so important to remember that about her, to see her as more than just a victim in this case.
Right, because it's those dreams, that dedication. It tragically gets cut short on August 6th, 2015, a seemingly ordinary Thursday night that turns out to be anything but.
Yeah, that's the thing about these cases, isn't it? It's just the way that a single night can become like a turning point.
Yeah.
This before and after that splits life in two. And in Heather's case, that night involves a trip to a local bar with some friends. A pretty normal start to the night, it seemed.
Yeah, and it's at this bar where she crosses paths with Brandon Bowling. Now, they weren't complete strangers. They followed each other on social media, and they'd been on a couple of dates, according to what we've gathered. But the details of their interaction that night, or even if they spoke directly, it's kind of a question mark.
Right. And what we do know is that later on that night, Heather calls a newer acquaintance, a guy named Michael. And she calls him kind of out of the blue, it seems, because someone was, quote unquote, bothering her at the bar.
And this is where things already start to feel a little unsettling, right? Like, who was bothering her? Was it Brandon? The information that we have doesn't give us those answers.
Exactly. And it's these unanswered questions that become like these missing pieces of the puzzle. So we know that Michael goes to the bar and they grab some food at another spot, and he ends up driving her back to her apartment around 2:15 in the morning.
He even holds on to her apartment keys because she had a bit too much to drink. And that detail might seem small, but trust me, it comes back into play later. But for now, it's just another Thursday night fading into a Friday morning.
Yeah. And none of us, especially Heather, could have predicted what awaited her on the other side of sunrise. Because that Friday morning, the unthinkable happened. Heather's friend and colleague Kelsey stopped by her apartment to wake her up. They had a routine, but this time she found the door unlocked.
And inside, well, it was every friend's worst nightmare. The scene, as it's described, is horrific. A brutal attack, a young life taken far too soon.
Yeah, it's in those moments, when we're confronted with the sheer brutality of a crime, that those seemingly insignificant details, they become so crucial.
Absolutely. And this is where the meticulous work of investigators comes into play. There were no signs of forced entry suggesting that the perpetrator was someone Heather knew or at least had been invited in. Her apartment was relatively undisturbed, which seemed to rule out robbery as a primary motive.
Our phone was still there, which, that almost seems unusual these days, but, this was 2015. But amidst all of that, there were signs of a struggle, bloodstains, and most importantly, a single fingerprint on the sheet near Heather's body.
Wow, a tiny detail that would soon become a game changer in the investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. But initially, Michael, the friend who walked Heather home, he naturally becomes a person of interest. He was, after all, the last known person to see her alive based on, his account and security footage from that night.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, he had her keys.
Right. It's like something out of a true crime drama. Everyone's a suspect until proven otherwise.
Exactly. And then there's Chaz, the ex-boyfriend. We know from the information that he had a history of jealousy and controlling behavior. So that certainly raises some red flags. It's the kind of detail that investigators can't afford to ignore.
So the Murfreesboro Police Department has their work cut out for them. Multiple potential leads a community that's desperate for answers. And all the pressure of this high-profile case, how did they handle it?
Well, to their credit, they remained very methodical, and they focused on the evidence. They questioned Michael extensively, of course, and his alibi for the time of the murder, it checked out. And crucially, his fingerprints didn't match the one that was found at the crime scene.
So one suspect down. What about Chaz?
Well, they brought him in as well. But it turned out he had a solid alibi for the night of Heather's murder. And later DNA evidence cleared both Michael and Chaz.
Innocent until proven guilty, it's a cornerstone of our justice system. And this case really highlights why that's so important.
Absolutely. Imagine the weight on the shoulders of those investigators. One wrong move, one hasty conclusion, and the real perpetrator could have walked free. But they stuck with the evidence, and that evidence would indeed lead somewhere unexpected.
It all comes down to that fingerprint, doesn't it? That one single clue they found at the crime scene. 8 days after Heather's murder, investigators got their match.
Brandon Bowling.
It's incredible how one piece of evidence can just blow everything wide open like that.
Yeah, it really is. It's a powerful reminder that even in the age of DNA analysis and all this digital forensics we have, sometimes it's those fundamental investigative techniques that make all the difference.
And in this case, it wasn't just the fingerprint. We have to remember that Brandon initially admitted to being in Heather's apartment. He claimed they had a consensual encounter weeks prior. But that story totally fell apart under scrutiny.
Yeah, it's almost like he wanted to insert himself into the narrative, maybe to throw investigators off his scent.
It's really chilling when you think about it that way. Because, of course, when confronted with the fingerprint evidence, his story changed. He confessed to being in Heather's apartment that night, but what he confessed to, well, it was far darker than anyone could have imagined.
Yeah, and this is where the case takes a truly disturbing turn. There's one detail that's so unsettling and it's hard to even comprehend. The investigation uncovered that Brandon had actually filmed the crime on his cell phone.
We always talk about wanting to understand the why behind these crimes, but
Yeah.
sometimes, like in this case, the why is something we just can't rationalize.
I agree with you completely. And the fact that he recorded it, it speaks to a level of premeditation, a disturbing detachment from the reality of his actions. It goes way beyond what even the most seasoned investigators are used to encountering.
Yeah, it's this level of darkness that's just so hard to grasp. So, in light of this discovery, 12 charges were brought against Brandon, including aggravated rape and first-degree murder. And the prosecution's goal, a life sentence without parole.
Yeah, and understandably so. This wasn't just about justice for this horrific crime. It was about ensuring the safety of others as well.
Right, and then just when you think the story couldn't get any more complicated, another twist. Heather's mother, Jennifer, publicly forgives Brandon.
Wow. Can you imagine the strength it must have taken to make that choice, to look at the person who took your daughter's life and offer them forgiveness?
Mhm.
It just speaks to, I think, the incredible resilience of the human spirit, that capacity for compassion, even in the face of unimaginable loss.
Yeah, it's an act of grace that I think many of us struggle to even comprehend.
Yeah, and it seems to have really influenced the outcome of the case, too, because Brandon ended up pleading guilty to lesser charges,
Yeah.
second-degree murder and aggravated rape, and he received a 40-year sentence.
40 years. It's a long time, but it's still so hard to reconcile that with the gravity of his actions, especially knowing that level of premeditation involved.
Absolutely. It really speaks to the complexities of the justice system, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This balance between punishment and rehabilitation, societal expectations and the needs of the victim's family.
You're right. In cases like this, there are no easy answers. Just this profound sense of loss and the weight of all these unanswered questions. We'll never know exactly what drove Brandon to commit such a horrific act. And that disturbing detail that he filmed it, he documented his actions, it just adds another layer to this whole tragedy, doesn't it?
It really does. And it makes you wonder, if for some people, that desire for notoriety, for infamy, becomes as powerful a motive as any. It's a disturbing thought.
Right.
And it's one that I think will stay with us long after this deep dive is over.
We started this deep dive by saying that behind every headline, there's a human story. And in Heather's case, that story is one of love and loss and this enduring power of forgiveness. But it's also a stark reminder of the darkness that can reside in the human heart and the indelible mark that it leaves on all of those involved.